I've always been controversial, even when I was a socialist.
She was banned, protested, and erased, and still refused to be silent.
Third wave feminism, I feel like, was a whole different breed of feminism, which I never saw as feminism at all. The version of feminism that embraced gender identity ideology and the idea that trans women were women. So I was a young feminist at the time writing about feminism and was critical of prostitution and critical of pornography and critical of this idea that you could change your sex just by saying so.
This week, journalist Meghan Murphy joins me on the podcast to talk about courage, cancel culture, and our right to think freely.
Sex work is not work. It's mostly trafficking and sexual abuse that starts when girls are minors. The internet and social media came along and porn became ubiquitous. And now kids are growing up watching pornography.
Enjoy. Wow, Kashia, how great is the quality of your new podcast, Return to Wisdom? Oh, mate, I know. I have been recording at Byron Bay's premium content and podcast recording studio, Pod Byron. They are epic. It's new, it's fresh, it's legit, as you can see. If you want to upskill your brand, if you want to create a course online, this is the place to do it. Jump on at podbyron.com and be sure to check the show notes for a sneaky little discount on your first session. Pod Byron is where it's at. You! Before we get into today's show, I firstly want to thank you for being here. It is because you tune in each week that I'm able to continue on, and I really appreciate your support. Secondly, if you enjoy the content, please head on over to the homepage of the show. Hit subscribe, like, share, and please review the channel. It would mean the world. This is a small way you can contribute to better guests and greater conversations. You're listening to Return to Wisdom with Kashia. Welcome everyone to Return to Wisdom. Today's guest is Meghan Murphy, journalist, founder of Feminist Current, and host of the Same Drugs and Where Are All the Women podcasts. She's known for sharp, independent feminist analysis with bylines across major outlets and appearances from BBC to Joe Rogan. Welcome, Meghan.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thank you for having me.
It's awesome to have you here. Actually, I feel extremely honored to have you here because I have been a long time listener and follower of your work. I definitely found you from Joe Rogan because I was not on Twitter, now X, and I do remember him sharing your story on every podcast until he had you on, I think.
They were talking about it a lot, and I was so eager to talk myself. I mean, I was so grateful that he was covering my story and sharing it and sort of like advocating for me. But yeah, I think I contacted the booker a few times being like, hi, thanks so much for covering my story. I'd love to. I was just like desperate to come on and like talk about it on my own. So he did have me on eventually, and it was great.
Yeah, no, it was awesome. But like also it was, I mean, someone who wasn't on Twitter at the time, like you wouldn't know really otherwise, like no one was really covering it. And I mean, you got cancelled before there was a cancel culture. It was like one of the first like shocking cancels and look, then it just took off. You were really leading the march of being cancelled.
Yeah, I got canceled so many times, and the first time I was subject to a cancellation campaign, it was 2015, and then there was many more ever since then, and then probably the one that got the most coverage, the biggest cancellation was when I was banned from X for 4 years. But it was in 2015, I was writing for this leftist website, this news kind of media site. It was Canadian based, and there was this massive petition that all these leftists, these Canadian leftists, started to have me fired. I had a part-time editing job there, and I wrote for them, and helped with their podcast network and things like that. And then ever since then, it was sort of every time I tried to speak anywhere, there would be petitions and protests and so on and so forth. And then I banned from Twitter for 4 years, which was hell because I love tweeting.
It is like that's like the journalist's platform though too. It's like the sharing media for journalists. So I couldn't imagine that would have somewhat affected your career.
Yeah, like a lot. I mean, because I've always been independent, right? Like I've always been an independent writer. I've always done my podcast independently, always just done, I freelance. So there's nobody else really working on my behalf. It's just me, and I'm left to my own devices to build my audience and to, gain subscribers and things like, that's how I make a living. Is it's all subscription based and donation based through people who like my work and read my work and listen to the podcast. And if you can't reach an audience, then you're disappeared and you're really kind of hooped.
Well, thanks, Rogan, for making sure that didn't happen to you.
Thank you, Joe.
Maybe what we can start with is a little bit more about your history. So perhaps you can share with everyone why you were cancelled. And we'll go from there.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been controversial. Even when I was a socialist and a feminist, I was still controversial on the left and among feminists. I've been writing about feminism as, and, sort of leftism and socialism in general as well since, 2011, I would say. And right out the gate, I grew up as a part of the third wave, and I don't know how familiar people are in your audience with the various waves, but third wave feminism is the modern iteration of feminism. So the other waves, the first wave, the second wave, I feel like those waves were a lot more rooted in legislation. The first wave feminists fought for the vote, for example, things like property rights. Second wave feminists fought for reproductive rights. They fought against sexual harassment in the workplace. They fought to, make marital rape illegal. And they also fought against things like pornography and the sex industry and sexual objectification more broadly. But third wave feminism, I feel like, was a whole different breed of feminism, which I never saw as feminism at all, really. It was very theoretical and ideological and rooted in, I don't know, idealism as opposed to reality. So third wave feminism is the iteration of feminism that started to try to make objectification empowering for women, or, they invented that mantra, sex work is work. They sort of tried to
free the nipple,
neutralize. Yep. Free the nipple, slut walk. If anyone recalls slut walk, where a bunch of young women supposedly fought rape culture by marching down the street in their underwear. And like had all these like strippers and pole dancers and so on and so forth on their marches, and this is also the version of feminism that embraced gender identity ideology and the idea that trans women were women. And it was all very postmodern, I suppose. It was very academic, I think. And I just always thought it was really ridiculous. So I was a young feminist at the time writing about feminism and was critical of prostitution and critical of pornography and critical of objectification and critical of this idea that you could change your sex just by saying so. And so, so I was always quite controversial. I really blew up, I guess, when I started criticizing gender identity ideology. That was the big thing that turned me into persona non grata, I suppose. I testified against Canada's gender identity legislation, Bill C-16, back in 2017 at the Senate, and then was invited to speak about the impact of gender identity ideology and legislation on women's sex-based rights, in particular, women-only spaces, children, things like that, all around the world. And every single time I was booked to speak anywhere, we would get canceled, we would lose our venue, there would be protests, there would be petitions. And in Canada, in any case, there was almost a total media blackout on me, and more broadly, any criticism that any feminist might make of gender identity ideology, because it didn't fit the narrative that they wanted to share. They would cover this issue as though it was already decided that the good liberals or progressives or leftists, the nice people, were all in agreement that trans women were women, and that men who identified as women we should all pretend that they were female and let them into women's spaces. And anybody who said otherwise was a far right bigot. So they would cover Jordan Peterson, and they would interview him because they could position him as this baddie, right? Like as a misogynist or a right-wing guy who was, against all that was good and right and empathetic in the world. But they couldn't really do that with me because of my history and my story, and because at that time, I no longer identify as a leftist, but for most of my life I did, and certainly at that time I did. So it just didn't work for them. So they essentially just tried to completely erase me.
Which is huge. I did want to ask about that actually, because if you did identify as a leftist for like your entire life, I've listened to you speak about how your family was very progressive and you grew up in a very progressive city. Trying to be politically correct. It's not going to sound politically correct. Was it the transgender issues that was the thing that made you start to think more critically about the progressive left, or was it a series of?
It was so many different things. I mean, it was partly that I began to recognize how important it was to fight for free speech, and that leftists and feminists were essentially opposed to free speech. Nobody will say no one will come out right and say I'm opposed to free speech, but they are, in their actions and their advocacy, they're opposed to free speech, and they're very censorial, and they want to shut down anyone who they believe is saying bad or harmful things, bigoted things in their words, hateful things in their words. And I didn't support that, and I was advocating for free speech. So it just, there was a lot of reasons why I stopped identifying as a leftist, and I stopped feeling like that label and political ideology, I started to feel like it no longer fit anymore. Part of it was, even what I saw happening during Me Too. I didn't like these mass cancellations of individual men because of something, one woman said about him on the internet. I saw men's lives completely ruined and destroyed based on rumors and not facts, and without due process. And when I tried to ask questions about this, even, or, I ask other feminists, oh, okay, so why is this guy horrible? Like, you're saying that he's abusive. What did he do that was abusive? And nobody could answer me. And then they were angry that I would even dare to ask the question. I didn't like that. I started to feel really kind of controlled. They're very, leftists and feminists are very controlling and authoritarian, and they kind of think they own you. And if you do step out of line, or you challenge or question their ideologies or their mantras, you get canceled, and they're pretty vicious. And I wanted to be free to think for myself. I'm a writer. I want to write about what I want to write about. I want to learn about and understand and talk to whoever I want to. And that's just not something that's supported by progressives. It's just not. Um, and then, yeah, so many other things. Trump, Hillary Clinton, all these things that I just realized that I'd been lied to about for so long, by the media, by progressive media, by the government, by politicians, by the people that I was allied with, by my algorithm. Um, and so and then, yeah, being banned from Twitter, and just the fact that these people refuse to even engage in this thing that they claim to think was so important and righteous, like, if you think that if you're positive that you're so right that trans women are women, or, a woman who says that she's a man is a man, there's such a thing as a trans kid, we need to all accept this, then you should be able to argue that point. You should be able to defend your beliefs and your ideologies, and you should be able to explain to me, and you should desire to explain to people why you believe these things. So I was always willing to do that. I was like, I'll talk to whoever, as long as they're engaging in good faith and they're not some kind of crazy person, or, a dangerous person, as long as it was sort of legitimate and a fair and reasonable conversation that was worth my time, then sure, I'll debate whoever. I would take almost any platform to speak about what I believed, because I felt that I could defend what I was saying and what I was arguing. I could. And the fact that these people wouldn't do it, I just was like, you're not engaging in good faith. You don't have integrity. You're just using bullying and censorship and lies, and libels, and to win your aims and your goals. And that's not something that I respect.
Yeah. I found here where I guess the culture wars stuff isn't quite as loud, maybe, per se. But I'm like a deeply curious person. So if something is going on and people are like, oh, trans women are women, and like I just heard that off the bat, I'd be like, huh? Like and then I found that even just asking questions just so that you can get a bit more clarity on it, because it doesn't make sense to anyone ever. But that would put you in a basket of like, oh, you can't say that. Like straight away, oh my God, you can't say that because that's rude, or it's like not culturally acceptable. Like, wait, what? Like, why can't I ask why? Like, just why? Yeah, and it starts there, and I feel like, well, for me, it did anyway. But it was really good to know or to find other voices that were asking the questions maybe a little bit more aggressively than me, because I would be like, oh, okay, there's something I don't understand here, but I'm not going to get the answers here, so I don't know. But yeah, it was quite an eye opener for me anyway, and I feel like for many other people who. I mean, this was all pre-kids. Then once I had children, I was really like, hang on. Oh, no. I can't just let that pass anymore. Like, we got to have an actual conversation about it. So, yeah, I deeply appreciate your voice in this space, because it certainly gave me more confidence in speaking out about certain things and speaking to my school and making sure that I've properly educated my children. I'd love to go back to Me Too, because when that took off, I thought that was a really good thing. I thought it was bringing awareness to something that needed a lot of light shone on it. And then I too started feeling uncomfortable. Can you to speak about your process through that?
Yeah, I mean, at first I was really supportive also because I felt like what was happening was that women were sharing a common experience. Most, if not all women, I think, have experienced some form of at least, sexual harassment, if not sexual abuse or rape or sexual assault. And women just have such a different experience of sex and hooking up and dating than men do. We're always going to be vulnerable in a way that men aren't, and that a lot of men are never going to be able to understand or relate to. So I felt glad that we were having this public conversation about something that so many of us were experiencing and had experienced. But then it just became, I think, about in general, I don't like this airing of all of our personal grievances online with zero accountability. Like, I don't think it's fair to just go post something online. And I'm sure that I've been guilty of this too when I was younger. This was sort of really normalized in that time. I don't know if it still is in the same way. But I think it was pretty normal for younger women to air their grievances on like Facebook and talk about, personal stuff and, identify abusive men or men that they felt were abusive or whatever online. And yeah, I'm not sure I like that. I don't think that there's not any real accountability process there, and you don't get to hear the other side of the story. There's no due process. If you're accusing somebody of a crime, that's really serious. Like, I guess if you just want to be like, I don't like this guy, he's an asshole, fine, sure, whatever. I feel like it's still not great to post about these kinds of things on the internet. But sometimes it comes to that, or sometimes people ask, or sometimes you genuinely think someone is dangerous. But I remember there was this man in Vancouver who was the head of the creative writing department at UBC, the University of British Columbia, Stephen Galloway. He was a very well-known writer in Canada, and a woman that he'd had an affair with, at one point accused him of abuse, and his entire life was ruined. His entire career was ruined. He had, I think, a pretty serious, mental breakdown. It was really, really hard on him and had a really horrible impact on him. And there was no abuse. And nobody really even bothered to ask, not in my circles. This was one of the situations that was sort of waking me up to the fact that I wasn't so sure that I wanted to have this feminist label or be attached to this particular movement anymore in such an intensive way in any case. The fact that I couldn't even ask, okay, so you say he's guilty of abuse. What did he do? And no one would tell me because nobody knew. But they didn't want to bother to find out. They were just like, well, somebody said he was an abuser, so he's an abuser. That's not fair. These are really serious accusations. And again, they have the potential to destroy people's lives. And the fact that no one was interested in discovering the truth was really troubling to me.
Yeah, no, I remember hearing a couple of cases like that. I think, oh my God, there was a comedian. His last name's Ansari. And
Louis C.K.? Oh, okay. I remember the Ansari one, yeah.
Yeah, because
NC's Ansari. Is that right?
Oh my gosh.
I know who you're talking
You know
about.
who I'm talking about. But I remember when he was accused, or he was Me Too'd, for lack of a better term, and he did actually a comedian show. He did a comedy act speaking about the situation. And I mean, I've 5 children, 3 daughters, 2 sons. So I'm on like both ends of it. You're like, oh my God, like, one, I don't want my girls to ever be in a situation where they feel like they have been sexually assaulted. 2, I don't want my sons to be in a situation where they feel like everything's being consensual and now they're being Me Too'd. And so on both sides of it, I was like, like this is it. I don't know. I bring everything back to my children. Like, how would I feel if just like mothering the world? But it was a really big eye opener on like how it can go pear shaped, or at least the conversation needs to be analysed more. We need to have a little bit more due diligence before accusing someone and or not believing someone. It's like, it's a very complicated situation, but the Me Too movement made it so easy for false accusations to slide under the radar. So,
well, and just the hyperbole. I mean, there's a lot of examples of this. My friend Andy Mills he was working for the New York Times. I think I'm trying to remember the name of the podcast. He's a very, very skilled podcast producer. He's really good at his job, and he was one of the many men in media in America who were Me Too'd. And he hadn't really done anything. Like, I don't know, he'd been kind of an asshole to some women, or maybe he was like flirting in a way that made some women uncomfortable and he didn't realize it. But he's not a bad guy. He's a good guy. And he didn't sexually assault anyone. He didn't abuse anyone. And he was painted as an abuser. And, it ruined his career, and he lost all these friends, and it ruined his reputation. And it was just also ridiculous. I think a lot of it was about young women sort of wanting to feel like they had the power this was at the peak of cancel culture, right? And the people who were really into cancel culture, I think, were kind of seeking to feel powerful. Like, oh, I can just, tweet one thing and this person's over, that would make you feel quite powerful. So yeah, it was just, I think it was a really bad and stupid time in the history of feminism and progressivism.
yeah. Because then I feel like with the false allegations, I don't know what the greater picture is around that, but that then also delegitimizes actual victims of assault. So I don't know.
Yeah, and even for me now, it's, if I hear an accusation from somebody, I don't take it at face value often. Now I'm much more likely to be skeptical when somebody tells me, oh, this guy's abusive or this guy raped somebody. So I think it really backfired in terms of the intentions anyway. I mean, I think it's probably always good to question and to look for evidence and things, and think about whether or not your narrator is trustworthy. It's like, if a friend of mine who I trust tells me something like that, then yeah, I'll believe her. If I read something on the internet from somebody who I don't trust, then I probably won't take it all that seriously.
Well, it asks the population to critically think, if nothing else. In terms of like that third wave of feminism, because I mean, I still see people posting, I mean, not as much because the news cycles are so fast these days, but whenever the news cycles tend to slow down, I still see posts frequently enough of sex workers' work and trans women are women, and these kind of slogans that are coming out. What would you say to women who identify as feminists who are also upholding these slogans?
I mean, sex work is not work. It's mostly trafficking and sexual abuse that starts when girls are minors. I mean, most women in prostitution go into prostitution when they're underage. Sex work is a slogan that supports the interests of pimps and johns and traffickers and brothel owners who want to legitimize this industry as just a job like any other. And it's not a job like any other. I've known and talked to so many women over the years who've worked in the sex trade, who've been exploited in the sex trade, who've been abused and trafficked, like and all in all different areas of prostitution. Worked the streets on the downtown east side in Vancouver. Women who've worked in brothels in New Zealand, where prostitution is decriminalized and therefore supposedly safer. It's not. Women who were or are still high-end escorts who make a lot of money. Often men or people desiring to defend the sex trade will say, oh, well, what about these women who are choosing it and look at all the money they're making? Those women are not doing well either. They're really not. To work in prostitution, to you really have to compartmentalize a lot, and it's really bad for your mental health. And a lot of these women end up, they start out with mental health issues to begin with. I think a lot of them come from places of trauma and exploitation, and there's histories of molestation and sexual abuse there already, which is sort of how they end up in the industry in the first place. And then you end up taking drugs to cope, and you need to shut off, and you need to separate your body from your mind and from your soul, for lack of a better term. But I think to have to endure that kind of abuse and degradation, yeah, you really have to be able to put your mind somewhere else and compartmentalize what's happening to your body. And I don't think that's healthy for human beings. But I think it's all just a lie. And if you read about prostitution on the internet, you'll probably read stories from women who say, "Oh yeah, no, it's all good. I just really like sex," or "It's all fine. I'm getting paid. I may as well get paid if I'm just hooking up for free. Why shouldn't I be making money?" And it's like, well, wait, why are you hooking up with guys that you don't like? Like the whole point of having sex or hooking up or whatever is that you're doing it because you're into it and you're attracted to the person, and that's why you're making out with them or having sex with them. The only reason you would get paid is if you didn't want to do it. What's the payment for? The payment is so that you do something you don't want to do, because otherwise you wouldn't do it. If you're really into somebody and you're attracted to them and you care about them or you love them or you're just turned on by them, then you have sex with them. You don't have to get paid for it. You don't need to be coerced into doing it. It doesn't make any sense. And I feel like most people understand that, and they've just been given these lies to repeat so that they can pretend that this industry that is actually really horrific and disgusting and abusive and exploitative and just really awful is not that. So
I mean, it's really hard to reconcile that, which I know is true. I've listened to many stories of women who have been in those industries and have come out the other end. When you've also got like the Lily Phillips and Bonnie Blues of the world who are promoting it like it's the best thing ever, and now they've got all this freedom to do what they want and buy what they want and live these very luxurious lives. I mean, Bonnie Blue's another.
But they have to live with this, and man, they've sold their souls. I mean, imagine having to live with those ideas and experiences and memories in your head. I mean, that's never going to leave you. And I mean, those girls are never going to be able to live normal lives. Like I remember I was listening to an interview with, I think it was with Lily Phillips on trigonometry, and she was saying that, yeah, someday I'd like to, get married and have kids. And I was like, dude, nobody's going to want to marry you with this stuff out on the internet. And that's going to be a really painful realization, or at least it'll be very difficult for that. And what are you going to do when your kids learn about what you've done and your reputation, and that's making them uncomfortable? And, maybe their friends at school are picking on them because these videos are out there on the internet forever. You can't erase any of that stuff. I mean, no woman genuinely enjoys that experience. She'll say, "Oh yeah, this is my fantasy. I really wanted to." But, if you say that, then I don't think you have any idea what your fantasies are, because that's not sexually pleasurable for women. Women's bodies are not built to be penetrated by that many men in that period of time. It's painful. And I think both of them did talk about the pain and the injuries that they had to recuperate from after having sex with 1,000 men in 24 hours or whatever it was.
Yeah, we actually had an OnlyFans lady, I don't know, a young girl who was on OnlyFans who tried to replicate what those girls were doing and ended up in hospital. So I don't think those stories are shared enough. Like, we've got these, if you can deem it a success stories that get shared around the internet, and then you've got younger women who are looking at this like, oh wow, I can do this and make all this money, and then they attempt it and it's definitely not that. So yeah, it's
a lot of women in porn suffer a lot of injuries, anal prolapse and internal ripping, and it's just women's bodies are not built for that. They're just not. And especially if you're not enjoying it, I'm trying to not get into graphic detail, but if you're not turned on and enjoying the sex that you're having, you're more likely to experience some kind of injury. And it's just, never mind all the STI risks and the mental stuff. I mean, that stuff is, arguably even worse, the psychological toll that experiencing that kind of abuse and, again, degradation does to you, that will never leave your mind. And a lot of women who leave porn talk about that. A lot of the women who have been, done really, really well in porn. A lot of women don't do really well in porn. A lot of women are not, most women in pornography are not making millions. But we hear about the ones who are making millions. And so we can pretend like, oh, look at what she's done. Isn't this great? What a great business lady. And once those women leave, they'll talk about the trauma that they experienced that will never leave them. But I think a lot of people choose to ignore that.
How did feminists adopt this as like a part of the identity?
I think a lot of it came from academia. I think it comes from women who are sort of in elite positions, and really they're not the kind of women who would ever have to do prostitution or do pornography. So, it's sort of like fun and makes you seem like a cool and sexy, open-minded lady if you can pretend that you're down with porn and prostitution and those kinds of things, and pole dancing, and you love to go to the strip club. I think that feminism was co-opted by academia and then by the sex trade lobby, and by all these organizations that were invested in legalizing prostitution and normalizing pornography. And then, on top of all that, the internet and social media came along and porn became ubiquitous. And now kids are growing up watching pornography.
Do you ever feel like your energy's tanking, foggy, and tired all the time? Yeah, me too. Turns out that this could be low iron levels. Did you know 1 in 3 of us are iron deficient, and so many of the supplements out there are synthetic, they're harsh on your gut, and your body doesn't absorb them as well. What I love about Great Spirit is that their iron range is organic, it's made right here in Australia, and it's whole food based. So you're getting bioavailable minerals and nutrients. They've got thousands of happy customers, and honestly, the testimonials on their site are incredible. So if you want to check them out, you can head to greatspirit.com.au and use the code Kashia20 to get 20% off your first order. Enjoy the energy boost.
And girls have completely normalized pornifying themselves and posting thoughty selfies online and seeking that kind of attention from strange men on the internet and seeking that kind of validation. And I think feeling like this is what empowerment looks like, this is what empowerment feels like, because, you know, in the moment it does feel good to get that kind of attention, but it's not long lasting and it doesn't really build genuine confidence. It's not actually empowering that, you know, random strange men want to jack off to your body that you posted on the internet. That's just not. Those men don't know you. They don't care about you. They don't really like you. I'm sure they like that you're posting those photos for them. But yeah, I think that it was a combination of a lot of different things. And, you know, at the same time, it's sort of a cope that makes sense. You know, if you're a young woman and you are being objectified, I think you don't wanna feel bad. You don't wanna feel bad about yourself. You wanna feel like it's okay. If you're engaged in hookup culture and you're 20 years old and, you know, maybe it doesn't really feel so good for a man to go home with you and then never call you or speak to you again or treat you disrespectfully, but you don't wanna feel bad about that, so you tell yourself that it's empowering and that you don't care and you can just have casual sex just like a man. Even though I really don't think that's true for most women. Again, I don't think that we are built that way. I don't think we've evolved that way. We haven't, you know, women have evolved to bond with the men they sleep with for very practical reasons, because if we sleep with a man, we might get pregnant, and so we want to bond with the father of our child. Um, we're quite literally wired in that way. Um, and that's not taught to young women anymore. We're taught that we can be like men and we can have casual sex like just like men, and it doesn't have to mean something. And for the most part, that's not really true. And I think it's a really unhealthy, sometimes dangerous message, at least a message that will result in some hurt and heartache down the line to tell young women. And I experienced that, you know, when I was younger, thinking that I could, you know, I could be a player just like the men and have casual sex just like the men, but it didn't make me feel good. It made me feel bad. And I was treated badly. You know, it wasn't all bad. Sometimes it's fun. And then sometimes you're treated badly and you kind of just want to shut that out. And at a certain point, when I started learning more about evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology and things like that, I was like, oh, yeah, no, it's totally normal that you catch feelings when you share this very intimate experience with a man and that you would bond with him.
Yeah.
It's the most intimate. It's the most bonding experience, you know? Of course you have feelings about it. Hopefully you like the guy. Why would you want to not like the man that you're sleeping with? What a weird thing to aspire to.
Yeah, and it does feel like somewhat twisted to try and remove yourself from those feelings as well. When you can just say, oh yeah, like, you know, it's just a body and it's just sex and now I can get paid for it. It's like, well, it's a bit more than that, just a little bit, and for really good reason. And I think there's a really good protective mechanism in there that we've thwarted to a degree by playing the hookup culture game on both sides. I actually think that there are boys that got really damaged or do get damaged with hookup culture as well. Younger boys, I would imagine, not players, but like, you know, there's like a messaging there. I think that there's some part of men that would also bond and they're told that they shouldn't be, or it's all just like, it's not cool to. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like as a whole,
I mean, men suppress their feelings too, right? I mean, I think you're right. I think that there's plenty of men who do get attached and then feel like they shouldn't get attached or feel like they shouldn't have those feelings, and that it's cooler and maybe freer and maybe safer because you won't get hurt and you're not vulnerable than to push those feelings away and to just sleep around, and that makes you feel like a big man or feel masculine or something like that. And yeah, I mean, I think it's probably hurtful on both ends, but I do know that there's women are particularly wired to bond with the men they have sex with, and if they have an orgasm, they're getting this hit of the love hormone, oxytocin, the bonding hormone. It's how things work, and we were built this way, and it's so weird to try to reject our humanity, really, who we are and how we're built as human beings and how we've been functioning for eons.
It's funny. I've having had so many children. My previous podcast that I did with my friend Chloe, who also has 5 children, we did a lot of deep diving into the birth world and like pregnancy and postpartum and bonding with your baby. And it's so funny how like prior to having children, you never really hear about bonding or oxytocin in sex, or actually not a whole lot of sex related things unless you go into tantra. It's just like what you see in movies, which is fairly, I don't know, basic sex in movies. I'd probably say that. And then you hear about like when you start diving into the birth process, for those who do, like the oxytocin that's involved for you to go into labor, and like the oxytocin that's involved to create a good bond between you and your baby so that you can breastfeed, and like the letdown and all of these like beautiful connecting moments in your life. And then they're like, oh yeah, it's the same thing that you experience in sex at the peak of orgasm. You're like, oh yeah, like that bonding, making all the connections, hormones, like of course. Of course, like imagine being told that in sex ed at school, instead of just how not to get pregnant. Like, yeah, oh, okay, peak of orgasm, you're going to bond with the person that's inside of you. Like, okay, good to know.
Yeah, that's pretty good information to have.
Yeah, it would be great, like beforehand, because I think that, I don't know, I don't know how – I know that you speak with Mary Lou quite a bit, who's deep into the birth world, but I don't know how far you go into it. But, I mean, there's a lot of issues at the moment in the birth world in terms of like births that need assistance or cesarean sections. Like here in Australia, the C-section rate is, I think, above 40% now. And
yeah, I think it's a lot in the US too.
Yeah, it's pretty gnarly for an experience or a situation that should just unfold quite naturally. But I'm like, if we're teaching kids or the younger population that sex is, it's not really anything. It's how you would make babies, and also it's for a bit of fun. Like you are disconnecting yourself from those like bonding hormones, or like you're depleting that potential for connection. And I always think like maybe it's that's kind of interfering now with the birthing process, because if you're unable to feel those hormones and feel that process in the thing you're doing to create the baby, it's like, well, you're probably kind of depleting the potential to get the baby out with ease. To baby in with ease, baby out with ease. Yeah, I think that made sense. Yeah, but it was one of those things that I'm like, how did that become adopted by feminists? And like likewise, the transgender issue. I mean, I don't know if you've seen online, but here in Australia, we're currently still dealing with transgender situations. A woman named Rachel Wong, who has the foundation Women's Forum Australia, she's been covering a story of a young man who sexually abused his 5-year-old daughter, and has now gone to court and received a disgustingly reduced sentence. because he's claimed he is transgender, or he's a trans woman, and is now in a woman's prison with a...
Oh, God.
Yes. Yeah, so it's still happening. I mean, this has been, I think, about a week that's all been happening. And I know that you are quite vocal on this issue. So please enlighten us as to why this is not good. Like, where, I don't even know where you can begin with that, but it's something that's obviously not spoken about enough here, because I'm pretty sure that a lot of places overseas have now started to reel in allowing, trans women in women's prisons, at least, and now in sports. So please share with us in Australia why that's a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, it was such a relief when Trump won the election in America and immediately started signing these executive orders banning men from women's sports and prisons and banning the transitioning of kids and giving or attempting to, in any case. Obviously it differs from state to state, but he's attempting to limit the very easy distribution of puberty blockers and hormones to minors. And, they've started rolling back all of these policies and this legislation across the world, except for in Canada and Australia. Canada is still full steam ahead on gender identity ideology, and they have not done anything to keep men out of women's prisons or out of women's sports or to stop the transitioning of minors, with the exception of one province, Alberta, and their conservative Premier Danielle Smith, who's been fighting to at least stop the transitioning of kids and to keep males out of female sports, and getting a ton of hate and pushback for doing so. But the federal government has no interest in limiting any of these things, and it's the fault of the federal government. It's the fault of the reigning Liberal Party that men are in women's prisons to begin with. And Justin Trudeau was the head of the Liberal Party in Canada for 10 years. He claimed to be this feminist, this super progressive guy, and was made aware of the fact that men were in women's prisons, and often these men were violent predators, sexual abusers, pedophiles, rapists, and just has completely ignored the issue and continued to let this happen. And now we have a different Prime Minister, Mark Carney, but the same Liberal Party, who's towing the line. He's continuing on, and in the same vein as Trudeau, nothing's changed. In fact, things are probably getting worse. But yeah, it's disgusting. It's disgusting that this was allowed to happen to begin with, and it's disgusting that these parties and politicians and the media who all pretend, again, to be on board with women's rights and try to vilify the right, whatever that means nowadays. These labels seem to mean very little at this point, as far as I'm concerned. They label anyone who challenges these practices as some kind of far right extremist, when for most of history it would have been understood why there shouldn't be men in the women's washroom and in women's shelters and in women's transition houses, and why women shouldn't have to compete against men in sport. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous that we even need to explain these things, that it's not possible to change sex. It's never been possible to change sex. We've always known that as mammals. We've always known that it's only females that can get pregnant. It's just such a crazy time. It's so crazy. When I started speaking out about this, I knew that it was bad and dangerous and that it would nullify women's rights. I didn't realize how bad it would get and how many people would support this and get on board with this nonsense, this insanity that's been so dangerous for women and children everywhere.
Yeah, no, I'm just wondering how we implement Trump. I don't know how do you change those policies? Because at the moment, this is in a Victorian prison. I'm not actually quite sure if it's happening in New South Wales where I am, but Jacinta Allen is the Premier of of Victoria, and she is head in the sand, like absolutely not saying anything. I know that there was a case maybe in 2000 where a sexual predator, he was being imprisoned for raping 2 women, then identified as a woman and went into the women's prison there, and that got crickets from everyone. And everyone, I know it was contested by Rachel Wong again, and they all said, "Oh, we don't have the power to do that." And I'm like, how? What? How does that happen? How does that come to be? Like, where in anyone's mind does that make any sense? It's like the transgender thing probably would have been fine if you didn't come after children and start putting sexual predators in women's prisons, and men weren't entering women's sports. But like, you take it to these extremes, and then obviously you're going to get some pushback. Surely. But no, it took a whole presidential change for you guys. So I'm wondering how how we
Well,
get that.
I think Americans just got really fed up with the Democrats, and America has always been more invested in free speech and civil liberties and individual rights, and has had more fight in them than Canadians. Canadians are famously apathetic and passive and don't like to engage in conflict. But beyond that, in Canada, we have such a small media landscape, and most media outlets are government funded, at least in part. And so they are really quite literally towing the line of the Liberal Party, because if they don't, they'll be out of a job. They'll lose that funding. Pierre Poilievre, who is the leader of the Conservative Party, the federal Conservative Party, who many of us hoped would win the election but did not, because the media had spent so much time fear-mongering about Trump adopting Canada as a 51st state, which, they should count themselves lucky, in my opinion. But, people are just very propagandized in Canada and don't really understand what's going on, and fear things that they should not, and fail to fear things that they should. Progressives nowadays, Canada's a very progressive country. Progressives are very invested in authoritarianism. They want more rules, they want more controls, and they want to punish people who don't go along. And we saw that happen during COVID. Who was it that supported the vaccine mandates? Who was it that supported the lockdowns? Who wanted their neighbors to be jailed for having grandma over for Christmas dinner? It was the progressives. It was the left. And I am, sort of shocked that more people didn't learn their lesson. A lot of us did. A lot of us woke up. That was the final straw for a lot of people in terms of supporting leftist parties and progressive policies in general, and really fighting for sovereignty and freedom and our charter rights, but not enough in Canada in any case. So, yeah, I think a lot of Americans saw they were being lied to about Trump, and that they were being lied about. They were being slandered over and over and over again by the Democrats and by the mainstream media, and they were sick of it. And they were sick of being silenced and censored for trying to speak out about things like gender identity, ideology, and just in general to speak about their concerns about immigration and many other issues. But it was just, they were treated as though they were deplorables, right? Hillary Clinton famously called Trump supporters deplorables, and pushed back. And Canadians just don't have that fight in them. I was really heartened by the Freedom Convoy, by the truckers in Canada who successfully ended the mandates and the lockdowns. But it seems clear that there's still a lot of people across the country who still trust the government and still trust the mainstream media, and still are very elitist in their thinking and have a lot of disdain for the working class.
I really like that you mentioned freedom of speech, and in the States there is that, right? part of the constitution. But here and in the UK, not so much. I mean, I know you've been following what had happened in the UK. I don't know, the news cycle was so fast. It was like Graham Linehan got arrested for tweets, and then Irina, the young girl on the train getting stabbed, and then Charlie Kirk. Like, it was just boom, 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 like really fast. But since that kind of settled a little bit, I mean, I've just seen back-to-back people being arrested for tweets in the UK. And I know that you are a fierce advocate for free speech. So why you would encourage people to speak up about the things that they're passionate about. And then also maybe we can talk about the cancellation of people on one side or the other, and how to avoid that, because I can kind of see it happening. Like, what we saw as a lot of people questioning the left being cancelled now looks like they might be trying to get their own.
Yeah, I mean, free speech is all we have. If we don't have free speech, we have nothing. We can't fight for our rights. We can't fight for anything. We can't fight for democracy. We can't protect. There's no democracy without free speech, really. Yeah, it's it has to be the number one priority. It has to be the first thing. Without that, we can't accomplish anything else. So there has to be free speech. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. And I think a lot of people don't realize that if they oppose free speech because they oppose whatever they view as hate speech or hateful speech, then that's very likely to come back and bite them in the ass. You know, what makes you think that you're going to be protected when the tables turn and all of a sudden your beliefs are deemed hateful? So there can't be any such thing as hate speech. It doesn't make sense as a concept, and it's too nebulous. So, yeah, so, free speech is the number one thing. Free speech, free expression. I don't care if it's offensive. I don't care if it's bad. I don't care if it's hateful. I don't care if you don't like it. It's just, you gotta deal with it. And if you don't like it, you challenge it. And I mean, cancel culture is still of the left. I'm sure there's people on the right who would like to cancel various people, but the practices of cancel culture really have been pushed by the left and continue to be pushed by the left. And as much as I saw some people, I think there were some teachers in the US who lost their jobs because they supported the murder of Charlie Kirk or glorified it or downplayed it or something like that. And frankly, I think if you're in the position of a teacher, you shouldn't be sharing your politics with your students anyway. So I kind of think those firings are justified. I don't think that it would be justified if you were like a McDonald's employee and you lost your job because you posted a meme about how much you thought it was deserved that Charlie Kirk be murdered. I think that's a despicable thing to say. But I wouldn't support the firing of some, working class employee over posting something like that. And yeah, I mean, there was this big controversy over Jimmy Kimmel's show being temporarily suspended because he lied about the murderer, and painted him as MAGA, despite the fact that he knew and everyone else knew that the murderer was not MAGA, but of the left. I, didn't really see that as a big problem. I don't really care about Jimmy Kimmel or Jimmy Kimmel's show. I don't really think that many people watch it anymore. I think he should have lost his show for poor ratings. But I mean, that was really just about the affiliates. He's not on cable. He's subject to FCC regulations. He doesn't have free speech. Nobody on that show has free speech. There's never been free speech on late night on the Jimmy Kimmel show. The guests are told what they can say and what they can't say. It was just a ridiculous argument, and it was ridiculous to see Democrats and leftists having this big freak out about how we needed to protect free speech because Jimmy Kimmel's show is temporarily suspended when they've been rallying for censorship for the past 10 years and said nothing when, people like me were banned from Twitter for saying that men aren't women, or, when the Democrats censored the Hunter Biden story on Twitter, when they were banning endless people and having people fired for challenging the vaccine mandates, again, the lockdowns, the narrative surrounding COVIDs, for mentioning things like ivermectin. Give me a break. We all know that the Democrats interfered and forced Facebook to ban people for challenging their preferred COVID narrative. And it's just, the hypocrisy just really blew me away.
No, it was really wild to see, especially because, I mean, yeah, someone like I might lose followers for saying this, but I was really deeply affected when I saw that Charlie Kirk was assassinated. It came up in my feed, and I was completely like not prepared to see someone assassinated. Yeah, it was really
horrifying.
But
I saw it almost right away on my Instagram feed, and yeah, it was very upsetting, that the situation.
Yeah,
really impacted me as well.
Yeah, and it was like not even just seeing an assassination, but I've followed Charlie Kirk for a little while purely because he is an incredible debater, and he has swayed me on a few subjects just because he's really good at speaking. And I knew he had a family, and like that just seemed like it had a big impact, a larger impact than I think would someone like Trump have been shot, because he was so moderate, I guess, for lack of another word.
He just seemed like such a really nice, good guy.
Yeah.
Which is not to say that I think that Trump is a bad guy, and
No.
certainly not to say that I think he deserves to be assassinated. But I mean, they tried to kill him twice already, so I suppose it would have been less of a shock. I'd hate to even say that out loud. I mean, God forbid.
No, I agree with you there. It's just more, I think, maybe because he wasn't actually a politician, and therefore you'd never see that risk. I don't know. There was something about it that just felt really personal on like the free speech front as well, and like having different opinions. Like imagine just like you have different opinions and therefore are a target like that.
He's not a controversial president. He's a father and a husband and a man who was just trying to have open debate and actually quite respectful conversations. And some people didn't like his opinions and killed him as a result of it. It's incredibly disturbing and terrifying. It feels like it could be any of us.
Yeah, but the effect didn't end there. It was like then the celebration that ensued. And even here in Australia, we had influencers jumping on this to speak about how, well, sometimes violence or political violence is necessary. And it was quite shocking because I was reading pieces written by influencers that like to call themselves journalists, and I'm like, wow, you have very strong opinions as well. Like, like he's a man that had strong opinions, and he debated those opinions, and that's apart from the opinions themselves is no different to what you're doing. So when you start celebrating and saying it's okay to stifle someone's opinions in such a way, I'm like surely you can see how the tables could be flipped, because there are crazies on both sides. Like I think it just revealed something that was quite shocking to me in terms of, I guess, where we are in humanity and how public discourse can ensue.
Yeah, I mean, the fact it was disturbing that it happened, and then almost even more disturbing to see how many people celebrated and defended and justified and glorified it. I was just so shocked and appalled and disgusted by what I was seeing on my feed from friends, from people I know, from public figures. People have really lost their humanity if you're going to celebrate the murder of this man, regardless of what you think about his politics.
Mm, mm. Yeah. And yeah, I do feel like that was felt everywhere. Did that like worry you in any sense of afterwards, like thinking about, oh, I share my opinion. I'm quite vocal about my opinion. Like I'm happy to speak to people. And I mean, I know that you've had some issues in the past with events and being protested and that kind of thing. Did that like, I don't know, make it an impact?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, but I've always been worried. I always worry every time I speak in public that I'm going to get shot. Like I have always worried about that, and I've always gotten violent threats, and the protesters that come to my events to protest me are always scary and unhinged. And I always insist on having private bodyguards and a police presence, and some people act like I'm being silly, and I know that I'm not being silly because I know how dangerous these people are. And I know that they think that political violence against their political enemies is acceptable and good, in fact. And that's why they're so hyperbolic in their speech, actually. That's why they call their political enemies or people like me bigots and fascists. And, that the Canadian government tried to qualify or, tried to label the parental rights movement as it's called. So the parents who are fighting back against gender identity ideology being taught in schools, for example. They tried to, label them as terrorists and as though they were violent. And it's the opposite. It's a complete reversal. I've been in danger. I left Vancouver because I didn't feel safe walking around in my own neighborhood in Vancouver where I had lived for so many years, because I was afraid of being attacked. And I had been stalked and attacked in public, and people have tried to attack me at events. And yeah, thank God that we had security. But yeah, I mean, it's always been scary. So of course this kind of thing is concerning, but I'm not sure that I feel more concerned than I have all these years, because I know what these people want to do and what they're capable of and what they defend and how they think about people who they've deemed bad, hateful, so on and so forth.
Wow, that's full on. I don't look, not being in the limelight to any degree at all, I've obviously never experienced anything like that, but I did assume like those that I listen to, especially people like Ben Shapiro, like the voices that are really out there and quite vocal about their views, who have spoken about how they've received death threats. And there are certain groups here in Australia as well, and like women who are fighting against, you name it, who also are on the receiving end of death threats. And I always just thought it was words. Like I never thought that anyone was super worried. Maybe the first few times that it happens, but then if it's like a regular onslaught, you probably get desensitized to it and you're like, yeah, okay, next, But after that happened, I was like, oh wow, like this is like, I guess it got real. And then now I'm like, oh, we can't just brush that off anymore. Like that can't just be all right, next crazy, yeah, sure, like whatever. And it made, for me, like the words, the labels that everyone just throws out there, fascist, racist, bigot, all of like transphobe, I don't know, you name it. Now it's like, okay, you can't just actually call people names anymore, because it's obviously like there's one more step past that. That's it. Like we need to scale it back a little bit in terms of how we're treating people, how we're like, I don't know, how the discourse is running, because it's
Yeah, I mean, I think that the fact that the left has adopted this extreme rhetoric and this extreme language to to really vilify their opponents has completely played into the danger that those of us who speak out about controversial issues are in, and we've seen that play out in terms of the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And I think that they should be accountable and responsible for that. I mean, it's you can disagree and dislike all you like. You can hate if you want to. But I think if you're the media, if you're a public figure, if you're an activist, even I do think that you should be responsible for what you're saying, and you should, if you have any integrity, you should engage in good faith. I've never said that I don't want so-called trans people to exist. I've argued against the concept of transgenderism. I don't think there's such a thing as a trans person, but that's, it's not the same thing as saying that I don't believe that people who identify as transgender don't exist, or that these people shouldn't have rights or anything like that. I've always been primarily arguing in defense of women's rights and women's safety and women's spaces, and in defense of children and minors more broadly, and the fact that people so willingly lie in order to turn those they disagree with into enemies, and not just enemies, but again, using terms like fascist and Nazi and terrorist, and saying like you have blood on your hands and things like that. I mean, these are harmful lies. And I do think that people should absolutely be more careful and thoughtful in their language, especially in light of what happened to Charlie Kirk.
And especially when we're labeling quite moderate concepts with these terms.
This is basic stuff. You can't change sex. A man can't become a woman. It's just not possible. Sorry.
Yeah, and
I don't make the rules.
Yeah.
I'm saying that doesn't mean that I'm responsible for that reality. It just is.
Yeah. And most of the population agrees with those sentiments. So it's a very small number of people who don't, and they're the ones throwing names at a very large population. So anyway, I thank you, Meghan, so much for being such a vocal voice in this space, because it is encouraging and it's needed. Very needed still. Please keep going. And everything that you cover, even when you're speaking about more current affairs, it's a very grounded view of things. So I do really appreciate you being here and sharing everything you can with my audience. If people want to find you other places, I mean, we've already said at the start of the episode, but if they want to find you, Substack, etc., can you share where?
Yeah. Like I said, I mean, I'm independent. I've always been independent, and I survive and can do my work, and I'm able to speak out and have platforms based on the fact that, people are subscribing to me mostly on Substack nowadays. So my Substack is at meghanmurphy.ca, or you can just search Meghan Murphy on Substack. I really appreciate paid subscribers. It's just $5 a month, and it enables me to continue to do this work. There's nowhere else I'm getting funding from. I'm not secretly funded by the right, as many like to say. And yeah, my podcast, The Same Drugs, you can find on Spotify. And if you do find it, please click the follow button. That actually helps a lot, just to follow. That helps gain support for the podcast and helps to monetize the podcast as well. I'm on YouTube. Again, search for Meghan Murphy or The Same Drugs. Please subscribe. Mary Lou Singleton and I are there every Wednesday night doing the Where Are All the Women streams, which I really enjoy, and others seem to be really enjoying as well. We talk mostly about current events, and culture, politics, so on and so forth. And of course, I'm back on X, thanks to Joe Rogan and Elon Musk, at Meghan E. Murphy.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Meghan.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was great to meet you and talk to you.
Thanks for joining me today. If this ignited a flame for you, please share, follow the show, and leave a review. The more support and subscriptions the show gets, the more powerful and credentialed guests I can bring on to deepen these conversations. I appreciate you being here, and I will see you next week.